6 months after the hatching, the mining colony on Kepler 442b had become the most important location in the known galaxy, though it bore little resemblance to its former self. What had once been a simple extraction operation was now the site of the first interspecies Academy of Creative Sciences, where beings from hundreds of worlds came to study the revolutionary discoveries that had emerged from Emma's bedtime stories. The three hatchlings, now the size of small horses, had become teachers in their own right. Melodis had developed the ability to help others access their own creative visualization skills, working with artists, engineers, and inventors to turn imagination into reality. Sage had become a master of emotional resonance, helping diplomats and counselors understand how empathy could bridge the gaps between vastly different species. Cosmos had grown into a living library, able to access and share knowledge from across the galaxy while teaching others how to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But perhaps the most remarkable development was how their influence had spread far beyond the Academy itself. Ships arriving from distant worlds brought reports of similar awakenings happening throughout the galaxy. Children who had never heard of dragons were spontaneously developing abilities that mirrored those of the hatchlings. Adults who had lost touch with their creative sides found themselves inspired to pursue dreams they had abandoned decades earlier. Emma, now 9 years old and the Academy's youngest faculty member, had become something of a legend herself. The Dragon Whisperer, as some called her, though she insisted she preferred Story Friend. Her daily reading sessions had evolved into interactive narrative experiences where dozens of students participated in creating living stories that seemed to take on lives of their own. Today marked a special occasion, the first graduation ceremony for students who had completed the full curriculum of creative reality studies. Representatives from the Galactic Council were present, along with scholars, artists, and leaders from across known space. But the real audience was the hundreds of children who had come to see how stories could literally change the universe. Thiraleth, now fully healed and more magnificent than ever, served as the ceremony's keynote speaker. Her voice, once thunderous with barely contained power, had developed new harmonics that spoke directly to the soul rather than merely the ears. 6 months ago, she began, my children were afraid to enter a universe that seemed hostile and cold. Today, they graduate their first class of students who will carry the gift of conscious creativity to every corner of the galaxy. This transformation was not achieved through force or superior technology, but through the simple act of one child reading bedtime stories with love and sincerity. The three hatchlings took their places beside their mother, no longer the tiny, frightened beings who had emerged from crystalline shells. Melodis's scales now shimmered with every color imaginable, shifting and flowing like liquid light. Sage's empathic abilities had grown so sophisticated that its presence alone could heal emotional wounds that had festered for years. Cosmos had become a living nexus of knowledge, its star-speckled hide containing glimpses of wisdom from civilizations that had existed before recorded history. We have learned, Melodis announced to the gathered crowd, that reality is not fixed and unchanging, but rather a canvas waiting for the right artist to discover what masterpiece it might become. Sage added, we have discovered that the barriers between species, between worlds, between possibilities themselves, are far more permeable than anyone believed. Love and wonder are the universal solvents that can dissolve any wall. Cosmos, ever the philosopher, concluded, we have found that the greatest adventures are not those that take us to distant places, but those that help us discover who we were always meant to become. The graduation ceremony itself was unlike anything ever witnessed in the galaxy. Instead of simply receiving diplomas, each graduate participated in a collaborative story creation that demonstrated their mastery of creative reality manipulation. The narratives they wove together painted visions of futures where war became obsolete because beings could resolve conflicts through shared imagination, where poverty ended because resources could be manifested through collective dreaming, where loneliness disappeared because every consciousness was connected through the universal library of stories. Emma watched with pride as her students, beings from dozens of different worlds, worked together to create wonders that would have been dismissed as impossible just months earlier. A young crystalline from the Andromeda sector learned to sing mathematical equations that solved themselves in midair. A teenage human from New Terra discovered she could paint with pure emotion, creating artworks that healed trauma with a single glance. An elderly Vorthon philosopher found that his wisdom could take physical form, becoming geometric structures that taught complex concepts through simple touch. But the most moving moment came when the graduates collectively decided to create a gift. For Emma, a story that captured the essence of what she had started that first day in the hangar. The tale they wove together told of a universe where every being carried within them a small flame of creativity, but where fear and isolation had caused many of these flames to dim almost to extinction. The story showed how a single act of kindness, reading stories to frightened babies, had rekindled fires that spread from world to world, creating a cascade of awakening that transformed the very nature of reality itself. In their narrative, Emma appeared not as a human child but as a universal archetype, the innocent voice that speaks truth without agenda, the pure heart that offers comfort without expectation of reward, the open mind that sees possibility where others see only problems. The story revealed that such figures appeared throughout history at moments when civilizations reached crossroads between stagnation and growth, between despair and hope. Every species has myths of the unexpected teacher, the graduate's story explained. The small one who arrives at the moment of greatest need and shows the way forward. Not through grand gestures or mighty powers, but through simple acts of connection that remind us of our shared dreams. As their story concluded, something magical happened. The flame of creativity they had described began to manifest visibly in the ceremony space, appearing as points of light above each person present. The flames pulsed and flickered and gradually began to move toward each other, connecting in networks of brilliant luminescence that spanned species barriers as if they didn't exist. Emma found herself at the center of this living constellation, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the full scope of what had begun. With 3 scared baby dragons and a book of bedtime stories, she wasn't just a child who had helped some unusual aliens. She had become a catalyst for the next phase of galactic evolution. This is only the beginning, Thirlith announced as the ceremony reached its climax. Today's graduates will return to their homeworlds carrying the seeds of transformation. They will teach others who will teach others, until the entire galaxy resonates with the understanding that imagination and reality are partners in the cosmic dance of creation. The 3 hatchlings, no longer hatchlings but young dragons in their own right, approached Emma for a final moment together before the graduates departed for their home systems. Melodis created a crown of living light that settled gently on Emma's head. Sage projected a wave of pure gratitude that encompassed everyone present. Cosmos manifested a crystalline book that contained every story that had ever been told, was being told, or would ever be told. Infinite narratives waiting for the right moment to transform potential into actuality. "Thank you," they said in unison, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to echo across dimensions, "for teaching us that the most powerful magic in any universe is simply caring enough to share a story with someone who needs to hear it." As the ceremony concluded and beings began to disperse, to carry their new knowledge to the stars, Emma remained in the hangar with her dragon friends. Just as she had every day for the past 6 months, she opened a new book. There were always new stories to discover, and began to read. The universe listened, and dreamed, and continued its eternal dance of becoming something more wonderful than it had been the moment before. And at the heart of it all, a little girl's voice carried tales of hope and wonder to anyone willing to listen, proving once again that the smallest acts of love can reshape reality itself. In years to come, historians would mark this day as the beginning of the age of creative consciousness, when the barriers between dream and reality finally dissolved completely. But for Emma, it was simply another afternoon spent reading stories to her friends, continuing the simple magic that her grandmother had taught her, and that she would one day teach to children of her own, human and dragon alike. The story of the restless, grumpy dragon hatchlings who were calmed by bedtime stories had become legend. But the greater story of how imagination and love could transform the universe itself was just beginning to unfold. 3 weeks had passed since the hatching, and the mining colony had transformed into something resembling a small city. Representatives from dozens of worlds had established temporary embassies, scientists had set up research stations at respectful distances, and journalists waited patiently for any news about the remarkable dragon family. Yet despite all the attention, the daily routine in the hangar remained surprisingly peaceful. Emma had returned every day to read to the hatchlings, and their growth had been extraordinary to witness. They were now the size of large dogs, their personalities becoming more distinct with each passing day. Melodis had developed into an enthusiastic explorer, often attempting to follow Emma around the colony when she wasn't reading. Sage had become the diplomatic one, somehow managing to charm even the most nervous scientists with gentle empathic projections that put everyone at ease. Cosmos remained the most contemplative, but had begun creating increasingly complex illusions that seemed to illustrate abstract concepts and philosophical ideas. The stories had evolved as well. Emma had exhausted her grandmother's book within the first week, but colonists had begun sharing stories from their own cultures and homeworlds. Dr. Chen contributed ancient Chinese folktales, while the Martian engineers shared legends of the great terraforming projects. Even some of the visiting aliens had offered their own mythologies, creating a rich tapestry of narratives from across the galaxy. Today was special, however, because the Hatchlings had made a request that surprised everyone. Instead of asking for more stories, they wanted to try telling one themselves. "We make story," Melodis announced, its voice now clear and confident. "About before time and after time and the bridge between." Sage nodded solemnly. "Story about why dragons and humans find each other in the big dark between stars." Cosmos, ever the philosopher, added, "Story about the shape of hope when it takes wing." Emma settled into her usual spot between the three young dragons, but this time she was the audience rather than the performer. The Hatchlings arranged themselves in a triangle, their combined presence creating a subtle shift in the hangar's atmosphere that everyone could feel. What happened next defied every expectation. Instead of simply speaking their story, the three Hatchlings began to weave it into existence using their developing abilities. Melodis created visual elements that hung in the air like living paintings. Sage projected emotions that allowed everyone present to feel what the characters in their tale experienced. Cosmos provided a narrative framework that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, telling their story not just in words and images but in pure meaning that bypassed language entirely. The story they told was hauntingly beautiful. It spoke of an ancient time when dragons were the guardians of creativity itself, shepherding the birth of new ideas and protecting the dreams of younger species. But as civilizations grew more complex and technological, they began to believe that imagination was merely a luxury, something to be set aside in favor of more practical concerns. The dragons, seeing their purpose forgotten, had withdrawn to the far edges of the galaxy, waiting for a time when their gifts would be needed again. They carried with them the collected stories, dreams, and hopes of a million worlds, preserving them against a future darkness that threatened to drain all wonder from the universe. Then came the time of great forgetting, Sage projected, its emotions carrying the weight of cosmic sadness. When beings stopped telling stories to their young, when dreams were dismissed as worthless, when the pathways between what is and what could be began to close forever. Melodies showed visions of worlds where creativity had died, where beings lived in gray uniformity without joy or wonder. Cities of identical buildings stretched endlessly under colorless skies, populated by people who had forgotten how to imagine anything beyond their immediate needs. But Cosmos revealed the deeper truth, that the universe itself was fighting back against this trend. Reality was subtly encouraging encounters between dragons and other species, creating opportunities for the old magic of storytelling to reawaken dormant possibilities. "The universe dreams," Cosmos explained in its wind chime voice, "and dreams need dreamers to make them real. Dragons cannot dream alone. We need the fresh eyes of young minds, the innocent voices that speak truth without fear." The story the Hatchlings wove showed Emma as she truly was in their perception, not just a human child, but a conduit for the fundamental creative force that shaped reality itself. When she read to them, she wasn't simply entertaining baby animals. She was participating in the cosmic process by which imagination became manifest. "The bridge between before time and after time," Melodis continued, "is built from shared stories. Each tale told with love and wonder adds another beam, another cable, another support that allows all beings to cross from what is to what might be." The assembled audience found themselves deeply moved by this narrative. Dr. Chen realized that her scientific studies of the Hatchlings had been approaching the phenomenon from entirely the wrong direction. These beings weren't just displaying unusual neural development, they were demonstrating The literal truth that consciousness and reality were far more intimately connected than anyone had imagined. Representative. Valdris discovered that his culture's rigid adherence to logic had been missing a crucial component. The Altarians' great achievements in mathematics and engineering had been possible only because their ancient ancestors had first dreamed of perfect order and then worked to make it real. The stories his people had abandoned centuries ago weren't primitive superstitions, they were the foundation upon which all rational thought was built. Lord Kexington found his entire worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself around a new understanding of true nobility. The hereditary privileges his class had claimed were meaningless compared to the responsibility of preserving and nurturing the creative spark that allowed civilizations to grow beyond mere survival. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Emma herself. As the Hatchlings story unfolded, she began to understand that her simple act of reading had been part of something far greater than she had imagined. The bedtime stories her grandmother had shared hadn't just been entertainment, they had been a sacred trust, passed down through generations to preserve humanity's connection to the infinite possibilities that lay just beyond the edges of everyday reality. So this is why Grandma always said stories were magic, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face as she finally comprehended the true significance of what had been happening in the hangar. The three hatchlings completed their tale by showing a vision of the future they were helping to create, a galaxy where every species contributed its unique perspective to an ever-growing library of stories, where creativity and logic worked together to solve problems that neither could address alone, where the bridges between worlds were built not from metal and energy, but from shared dreams and mutual wonder. As their story concluded, something unprecedented occurred. Every person present, regardless of species or background, found themselves spontaneously contributing to a collective narrative that seemed to emerge from the very fabric of space-time itself. They were no longer just an audience. They had become co-creators in the greatest story ever told, the ongoing saga of consciousness discovering its own infinite potential. The hangar filled with light that came from no external source, a radiance born from the convergence of imagination and reality that the hatchlings had made possible. In that moment, everyone present understood that they had witnessed the birth of something entirely new in the galaxy, a fusion of ancient wisdom and youthful wonder that would reshape the future of all intelligent life. The evening brought unexpected visitors to the mining colony. A sleek Galactic Council diplomatic vessel had arrived, followed closely by 2 research ships from the Universal Institute of Xenobiology, and a luxury transport that bore the markings of the Consortium of Stellar Nobles. Each group claimed urgent business regarding the dragons, and each seemed determined to gain access to what many were already calling the miracle in the hangar. Marcus Webb found himself juggling communications from some of the most powerful entities in known space, all while trying to maintain the peaceful environment that had proven so crucial to the hatchlings' development. The colony's small security force was woefully inadequate to handle the sudden influx of VIP visitors, and tensions were rising by the hour. Inside the hangar, Emma remained blissfully unaware of the political storm brewing around her. She had been reading for most of the day, and the 3 hatchlings showed no signs of losing interest in her stories. If anything, they seemed to grow more engaged with each tale, their responses becoming increasingly sophisticated as their young minds developed at an accelerated pace. The current story was The Weaver of Dreams, about a young woman who could create actual dreams and send them to people who needed hope or healing. As Emma read about the Dreamweaver's adventures, the 3 hatchlings began to demonstrate abilities that left the watching scientists speechless. Melodis, the adventurous purple-blue hatchling, started creating small illusions in the air above its claws, tiny images that corresponded to the characters in Emma's story. When she described the Dreamweaver's flying carpet, a miniature version appeared in shimmering light, complete with tasseled edges and intricate patterns. When the story mentioned a crystal palace, Melodis crafted a delicate structure of pure light that sparkled like captured starlight. Sage, the green-gold hatchling, seemed to be developing empathic abilities. As Emma read about the Dreamweaver's gift for understanding what people truly needed, Sage began to glow softly whenever someone in the hangar felt strong emotions. The little dragon would turn toward whoever was experiencing fear, excitement, or wonder, offering soft musical sounds that seemed to harmonize with and soothe whatever feelings were present. Cosmos, the star-scaled hatchling, displayed the most remarkable ability of all. As Emma read about the Dreamweaver's journeys to different worlds, Cosmos began to project actual images into the air. Not mere illusions like its sibling, but what appeared to be real views of distant places. The images showed alien landscapes, fantastic cities, and cosmic phenomena that no one in the hangar had ever seen before. "Those are real places," Therilith whispered in amazement. "My youngest is somehow accessing the universal memory, seeing locations that exist across the galaxy. This should be impossible for one so young." Dr. Chen was frantically adjusting her equipment to record these phenomena, but her instruments could barely register what was happening. "The energy readings are off the scale," she reported. "But it's not destructive energy, it's creative, constructive. It's as if they're learning to manipulate reality at a fundamental level." The political situation outside the hangar continued to deteriorate. Council Representative Valdris, a stern Altarian with bronze skin and silver eyes, demanded immediate access to the dragons in the name of galactic security. Dr. Yamato from the Universal Institute insisted that the hatchlings needed proper scientific study before their abilities became dangerous. Lord Kexington of the Stellar Nobles claimed ancient hereditary rights to all dragon encounters, based on treaties signed centuries ago. But Therilith remained adamant that her children would not be disturbed. When Marcus Webb tried to explain the political pressures the colony was facing, the great dragon's response was simple and final. "Let them rage and posture all they wish. My children have found peace here, and peace they shall have. Any who threaten that peace will discover why dragons were once feared across 1,000 worlds." Emma, still reading steadily, had reached the climax of The Weaver of Dreams. In the story, the Dreamweaver faced her greatest challenge, healing the nightmares of an entire world that had been traumatized by war. The task seemed impossible, but the Weaver discovered that the most powerful dreams were those created not by one person alone, but by many working together. As Emma read this passage, something extraordinary happened. The three hatchlings' individual abilities began to merge and amplify each other. Melodus's illusions became more solid and real. Sage's empathic projections reached every person in the hangar, filling them with the same sense of peace and wonder that the hatchlings themselves felt. Cosmos's visions expanded to show not just distant places, but distant possibilities, glimpses of futures where dragons and humans worked together to create marvels beyond imagination. The combined effect was overwhelming. Every person in the hangar found themselves caught up in a shared vision of hope and collaboration that transcended species barriers. They saw cities built in the clouds where dragons and humans lived in harmony. They witnessed great libraries where dragon lore and human knowledge merged to unlock the secrets of the universe. They experienced moments of pure joy as dragon children and human children played together among the stars. Outside the hangar, the arguing diplomats and scientists suddenly fell silent as the vision reached them as well. Through the windows, they could see the impossible sight of three tiny dragons creating wonders that defied every law of physics they thought they understood. "This changes everything," Dr. Yamato whispered, her scientific skepticism crumbling in the face of what she was witnessing. "These beings aren't just intelligent animals or even exotic aliens. They're something entirely new, a fusion." The harmony created by Emma's voice and the three hatchlings humming seemed to transform the very atmosphere of the hangar. The utilitarian space, all concrete and steel beams, suddenly felt warm and magical, as if the stories themselves were reshaping reality around them. Dr. Chen's instruments detected subtle changes in the electromagnetic fields, patterns that corresponded to the musical vibrations but extended far beyond simple sound waves. Emma had been reading for hours now, but showed no signs of fatigue. If anything, she seemed energized by the hatchlings' responses to each story. The baby dragons had grown more interactive as time passed, making small sounds of excitement during dramatic moments and settling into contented silence during peaceful passages. Therilith watched her children with wonder that bordered on reverence. "In the old stories of my people," she explained to Dr. Chen in a voice barely above a whisper, "it was said that the first dragons learned to speak by listening to the songs of creation itself. I always thought these were mere legends, but watching my children respond to your little storyteller, Perhaps the old tales hold more truth than I believed. The three hatchlings were beginning to show distinct personalities as they reacted to different types of stories. Melodis, the first to emerge, clearly favored adventure tales and would perk up whenever Emma read about brave heroes overcoming impossible odds. Sage preferred stories about friendship and cooperation, making soft crooning sounds whenever characters worked together to solve problems. Cosmos, the smallest but most observant, seemed to gravitate towards stories that contained deeper meanings or moral lessons as Emma began reading The Library at the End of Time, a complex tale about a place where all stories ever told were preserved forever. Something extraordinary happened. Cosmos suddenly spoke its first word, clear and unmistakable despite being only hours old. Story, the tiny dragon said, its voice like wind chimes made of starlight. The hangar fell completely silent except for Emma's gasp of delight. First words were incredibly significant in dragon culture. Theralith had explained earlier, often determining aspects of a dragon's future path in life. That Cosmos had chosen story as its introduction to language spoke volumes about the impact Emma was having on these remarkable creatures. "Did you hear that?" Emma exclaimed, gently stroking Cosmos's starry scales. "You said story. That's a really good first word." Melodis, not to be outdone by its sibling, suddenly piped up with more, in a voice like tiny bells, while Sage contributed a thoughtful friend that seemed to encompass not just Emma, but the entire concept of the bond they were forming. Theraleth's eyes were streaming with luminescent tears. "Never," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Never in all the histories of my people have hatchlings spoken so early or chosen such meaningful first words. Your stories are not just calming them, child. You are helping them discover who they are meant to become." The colony's xenolinguist, Professor Hendricks, had arrived sometime during the afternoon and was frantically taking notes on the developing dragon language patterns. The fact that the hatchlings were learning galactic standard, rather than their mother's ancient tongue, was unprecedented, suggesting a level of adaptability that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about dragon cognition. Emma, unaware of the scientific significance of what was happening, simply continued reading as if magical baby dragons speaking their first words was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon activity. She had moved on to The Boy Who Collected Sunsets, a story about a child who discovered that beautiful moments could be saved and shared with others who needed hope. As she read, the three hatchlings began to respond not just with sounds but with actions. When the story described the boy climbing a tall mountain to catch a particularly spectacular sunset, Melodis attempted to climb Emma's arm, tiny claws tickling as it made its way to her shoulder. When the tale spoke of the boy sharing his collected sunsets with lonely people, Sage nudged closer to the other hatchlings, as if understanding the concept of comfort through companionship. Most remarkably, when Emma read about the boy's realization that the most beautiful sunset of all was one shared with friends, all three hatchlings began to glow. Not with the blue light that had pulsed through their eggs, but with a warm, golden radiance that seemed to emanate from their very souls. "They're processing the emotional content of the narratives," Professor Hendricks muttered, his voice filled with academic excitement. "Their neurological development is accelerating beyond any known parameters. It's as if the stories are providing a framework for understanding complex concepts that should take months or even years to develop." Dr. Chen was more focused on the practical implications. "How is this affecting their physical development?" she wondered aloud, scanning the latest readings from her medical equipment. Their brain activity patterns are off the charts, but their vital signs remain perfectly stable. It's like the stories are providing optimal mental stimulation without any of the usual stress responses. Emma finished the sunset story and paused to drink some water that her mother had brought her. The three hatchlings used this break to explore their immediate surroundings more actively, though none of them ventured far from their storyteller. Melodis discovered the fascinating properties of Emma's shoelaces, while Sage became entranced by the texture of her book's worn leather cover. Cosmo simply sat and watched everything with those ancient-looking eyes, occasionally making small observations in its wind-chime voice. "Bookworm," Cosmos noted, touching one tiny claw to the leather binding. "Emma nice," added Sage, the concept of friendship clearly developing rapidly. "More adventure?" requested Melodis, its purple-blue scales shimmering with anticipation. Emma laughed with pure joy at these interactions. "Of course. Let's read about the ship that sailed between stars. This story featured a magical vessel that could travel anywhere in the universe, carrying its passengers to worlds of wonder and discovery. As Emma began this new tale, something shifted in the hangar's atmosphere. The three hatchlings arranged themselves in a perfect triangle around her, their combined humming creating harmonies that seemed to open doorways to other realms. Through the hangar's windows, colonists reported seeing strange lights in the sky that pulsed in rhythm with the dragon's song. Thyrileth raised her great head, testing the air with senses humans couldn't understand. "The barriers are thinning," she said with a mixture of awe and concern. "My children's response to your stories is creating resonances that reach beyond this reality. We are touching the edges of the realm where all stories exist." Dr. Chen felt a chill of excitement and fear. "Is that dangerous?" "Not dangerous," Thyrileth assured her, "but significant beyond measure. My people believed that stories were not mere entertainment, but actual doorways to infinite possibilities. If my children are learning to open those doorways at such a young age," she trailed off, watching her offspring with new understanding. Emma, oblivious to the cosmic implications of her bedtime story session, continued reading about the star-sailing ship with undiminished enthusiasm. The three hatchlings hung on every word, their responses becoming more sophisticated with each passing minute. They were learning not just language but the fundamental patterns of narrative itself, understanding how stories could convey meaning, emotion, and possibility in ways that simple facts never could. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, word of the day's events had spread far beyond the colony, carried by quantum communications to every corner of the galaxy. The first hatchling to emerge was no bigger than a house cat, though its proportions were distinctly draconic. Its scales shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue, and tiny wings that seemed too delicate for flight twitched with each breath. When it fully freed itself from the crystalline shell, it made a beeline straight for Emma, ignoring its massive mother and all the adults who had been anxiously watching the process. Emma giggled as the baby dragon nuzzled against her arm, its scales surprisingly warm and smooth to the touch. "Hello there, little one," she whispered, gently stroking the creature's head. The hatchling responded with a musical trill that sounded like happiness-given voice. Thyrileth watched this interaction with an expression that Dr. Chen could only describe as profound relief mixed with bewilderment. "In all the histories of my people," the great dragon murmured, "I have never heard of a hatchling bonding so immediately with a member of another species. Dragon young typically require days or even weeks to trust anyone beyond their mother." The second egg began to crack as Emma continued reading, having moved on to the dancing trees without missing a beat. This story told of an entire forest that came alive at night, with trees that waltzed under the stars and flowers that sang lullabies to sleeping animals. Emma's voice painted pictures of magic and wonder that seemed to resonate directly with the developing minds of the unborn dragons. The second hatchling that emerged was slightly larger than the first, with scales that shifted from emerald green to gold depending on the angle of the light. This one was more cautious, watching Emma for several minutes before cautiously approaching. When it finally made contact, it curled up against her side opposite the first hatchling, both baby dragons flanking her like protective bookends. "What should we call them?" Emma asked Thyrileth, as if naming dragon hatchlings was a perfectly normal part of her day. The great dragon considered this seriously. "In our tradition, dragons choose their own names when they first speak words rather than thoughts. But until then..." She studied her children with obvious affection. "The first, the brave one who emerged to your voice, we might call Melodis. The second, the cautious but loyal one, perhaps Sage." Emma repeated the names softly, and both hatchlings responded with pleased chirps. "And the third one?" she asked, glancing at the remaining egg, which was beginning to show hairline cracks along its surface. The smallest egg was taking longer to hatch, its occupant seemingly content to listen to the stories from within its crystalline cocoon. Emma had moved on to the Cloud Shepherd, a tale about a young boy who discovered he could guide clouds across the sky to bring rain where it was needed most. The steady rhythm of her voice seemed to be exactly what the final hatchling required. Dr. Chen found herself documenting everything, her scientific training warring with the sheer impossibility of what she was witnessing. The physiological changes in both Thyrileth and the hatchlings were remarkable. Stress hormones that had been spiking in the mother dragon system for days were now dropping to normal levels. The hatchlings' life signs, as measured by the colony's medical equipment, showed perfect stability and health. More colonists had gathered to watch. Word having spread throughout the settlement about the miracle occurring in the hangar, engineers, miners, doctors, teachers, and families all stood in respectful silence as an 8-year-old girl single-handedly solved a crisis that had stumped the colony's best minds. Emma's parents, Maria and David Martinez, arrived looking frantic with worry and amazement in equal measure. They had been searching for their daughter after she disappeared from their quarters, never imagining they would find her calmly reading bedtime stories to a family of dragons. "Emma, sweetheart," Maria called softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene but needing to know her daughter was safe. Emma looked up and waved cheerfully, careful not to disturb the 2 hatchlings who had fallen asleep against her sides. "Hi, Mom. Look, I'm helping the baby dragons not be scared anymore. They really like stories." The 3rd egg finally began to hatch in earnest as Emma started reading The Singing Stones, a story about magical rocks that could produce any melody you asked them to play. The final hatchling emerged slowly, deliberately, revealing scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies, deep black shot through with silver that sparkled like distant stars. This smallest dragon was different from its siblings. Where they had been immediately drawn to Emma, this one sat very still and studied everything around it with ancient-looking eyes. When it finally moved, it approached not Emma but Theralith, touching its tiny snout to its mother's massive claw, before turning to regard the human child with what could only be described as regal acknowledgement. "This one will be called Cosmos," Theralith said with certainty. "I can see the wisdom of the void in those eyes. This child will grow to be a great keeper of knowledge." All 3 hatchlings were now arranged around Emma like a living constellation as she continued reading. The story seemed to entrance them completely, their attention focused with the intensity that only very young minds can achieve. They responded to different parts of the tales. Melodis perked up during action sequences, Sage during moments of friendship and cooperation, and Cosmos during the quieter, more thoughtful passages. Word of the successful hatching had reached the colony's communications center, and requests for information were pouring in from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council wanted immediate reports. Various scientific institutions were offering massive funding for research opportunities. News organizations were clamoring for interviews and footage, but Theralith remained adamant about limiting contact with the outside universe. "My children are safe here," she declared firmly. "They have found peace with your kind, something I would not have believed possible. The galaxy is full of those who would see them as weapons to be wielded or trophies to be displayed. Here they are simply children listening to stories." Marcus Webb found himself in the unprecedented position of having to diplomatically refuse some of the most powerful organizations in known space. The mining colony that had been an insignificant outpost just days before was now the center of galactic attention, all because a little girl had decided that scared babies needed bedtime stories. As Emma read The Mirror That Showed, "Tomorrow, a story about learning to shape your own future rather than simply accepting what seemed inevitable," the 3 hatchlings began to do something that made even Theralith gasp in surprise. They started to hum along with Emma's voice, creating a harmony that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. The sound was hauntingly beautiful. Like a choir of angels learning to sing for the first time, it spoke of wonder and discovery, of new life taking its first steps into an infinite universe. Every person in the hangar felt tears running down their faces without quite understanding why. "They're singing," Emma whispered in amazement, never having heard anything so beautiful in her short life. "The baby dragons are singing with the story." Emma Martinez had always been different from the other children on the colony. While her friends played with holographic toys and virtual reality games, Emma preferred her collection of ancient paper books that her grandmother had smuggled aboard their transport ship. Her parents, both atmospheric engineers, often found her reading in impossible places, perched on top of storage containers, curled up inside maintenance crawlways, or sitting cross-legged in the hydroponics bay surrounded by growing vegetables. The 8-year-old had been listening at doorways and hiding behind corners for days, piecing together fragments of adult conversations about the dragon and her eggs. Emma's curiosity had always been stronger than her sense of self-preservation, a trait that gave her parents constant anxiety, but had also led to some remarkable discoveries around the colony. She had seen Theralith through the hangar windows, watched the great dragon's desperate attempts to comfort her unborn children, Emma's heart, innocent of the fear that paralyzed most adults in the dragon's presence, simply ached for the obvious. Pain of a mother unable to help her babies. The book clutched in Emma's small hands was Treasury of Earth's Children's Stories, a collection her grandmother had read to her countless times before the old woman's death 2 years earlier. The leather cover was worn smooth from handling, and the pages were soft with age. Emma knew every story by heart, but she still loved the feel of the physical book, the way it smelled like home and comfort and safety. Dr. Chen noticed Emma first, her sharp intake of breath alerting Theralith to the child's presence. The dragon's massive head swung around, amber eyes focusing on the tiny human figure with an intensity that should have sent any reasonable person running. Instead, Emma took 3 careful steps forward. "Is she sad because her babies are scared?" Emma asked, her voice clear and unafraid in the vast hangar space. Sarah found herself caught between the urge to grab Emma and run, and fascination at the child's complete lack of fear. "Yes, sweetie, but you shouldn't be here." "It's not safe. Why are they scared?" Emma interrupted, taking another step closer to the eggs. The largest one, the one with the crack running down its surface, seemed to pulse more slowly when she approached. Theralith studied the small human with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. When the dragon spoke, her voice was gentler than Sarah had ever heard it. "They feel alone, little one. They sense danger and confusion in the world they are about to enter. In the old times, dragon hatchlings emerged to the voices of their entire clan, surrounded by safety and love. But I am the last, and my voice alone cannot give them the peace they need." Emma nodded seriously as if this made perfect sense to her 8-year-old logic. "When I was little and got scared at night, my grandma would read me stories. She said stories were like magic because they could take you anywhere safe and happy." The dragon tilted her great head, considering this. "Stories? Like this one?" Emma said, holding up her book. "It has lots of good stories. Want me to read one to your babies?" The suggestion was so unexpected, so seemingly naive, that Sarah started to protest. But something in Theralith's expression stopped her. The dragon was looking at Emma with a mixture of hope and desperate willingness to try anything. "You would do this?" Theralith asked softly. "You would speak to my children?" Emma was already settling herself cross-legged on the floor between the 3 massive eggs, opening her book to the first story. "Sure, which one should I start with? There's The Brave Little Rabbit, or The Star That Forgot How to Shine, or The Garden Where Nothing Ever Died." The cracked egg pulsed, and through the gap the amber eye blinked slowly. Emma noticed and smiled, reaching out to gently pat the crystalline shell. "Don't worry, baby dragon. I'll read you something nice." She chose The Brave Little Rabbit, a story about a small creature who helped all the other animals in the forest by being kind and clever instead of big and strong. Emma's voice, clear and young and utterly sincere, filled the hangar with words that spoke of friendship, courage, and the power of caring for others. Something remarkable began to happen as Emma read. The erratic pulsing of the eggs gradually steadied, matching the rhythm of her speech. The blue light that had been flickering uncertainly grew stronger and more consistent. Through the crack in the largest egg, the amber eye had closed, and Sarah could swear she heard something like a contented sigh from within. Theralith watched in amazement as her children responded to this small human's voice in a way they had never responded to her own. The tension that had been building in the dragon's massive frame for days began to ease. Her own breathing deepened and slowed, synchronizing with Emma's steady, soothing narration. "How is this possible?" Sarah whispered to herself, but Theralith heard. "Young voices carry truth differently than old ones," the dragon explained quietly, careful not to interrupt Emma's reading. "Children speak without the weight of experience, without fear of judgment or failure. Their words carry innocence, and innocence is the most powerful magic in any universe." Emma finished the first story and immediately began another, barely pausing to turn the page. The Star That Forgot How to Shine was about a lonely star who thought she was broken because her light was different from all the others, until she realized that her unique glow was exactly what the universe needed. The second egg, which had been the most agitated, began to calm as Emma read about the star's journey to self-acceptance. The third egg, smallest of the 3, seemed to pulse in time with the rhythm of Emma's voice, as if the hatchling inside was learning the cadence of this strange new language of comfort. Colony personnel began to gather at the hangar entrance, drawn by reports of what was happening. Marcus Webb arrived with a security team, but Theralith's warning glare kept them at a distance. Dr. Chen gestured for silence, her scientific mind racing to understand the phenomenon she was witnessing. Emma seemed completely unaware of her growing audience. Her entire focus was on the 3 eggs and the stories she was sharing with their occupants. She read with the same enthusiasm she might show to human children, complete with different voices for various characters and dramatic pauses at exciting moments. The garden where nothing ever died came next, a bittersweet tale about a magical place where everything beautiful lasted forever, and the young gardener who learned that even eternal things needed change to remain truly alive. Emma's voice caught slightly on some of the more complex emotional passages, but she pushed through with the determination that only children possess when they believe they are doing something important. As the 3rd story concluded, something unprecedented occurred. The largest egg, the one with the crack, suddenly blazed with brilliant blue light. The crack widened with a sound like singing crystal, and a tiny claw emerged, followed by a delicate snout that gleamed like polished obsidian. The first hatchling had begun to emerge, and instead of the terrified cries they had all expected, it made a sound like a purring kitten mixed with wind chimes. The baby dragon's eyes opened and immediately fixed on Emma's face with obvious adoration. The evening brought unexpected visitors to the mining colony. A sleek Galactic Council diplomatic vessel had arrived, followed closely by 2 research ships from the Universal Institute of Xenobiology, and a luxury transport that bore the markings of the consortium of stellar nobles. Each group claimed urgent business regarding the dragons, and each seemed determined to gain access to what many were already calling the miracle in the hangar. Marcus Webb found himself juggling communications from some of the most powerful entities in known space, all while trying to maintain the peaceful environment that had proven so crucial to the hatchlings' development. The colony's small security force was woefully inadequate to handle the sudden influx of VIP visitors, and tensions were rising by the hour. Inside the hangar, Emma remained blissfully unaware of the political storm brewing around her. She had been reading for most of the day, and the 3 hatchlings showed no signs of losing interest in her stories. If anything, they seemed to grow more engaged with each tale, their responses becoming increasingly sophisticated as their young minds developed at an accelerated pace. And the current story was The Weaver of Dreams, about a young woman who could create actual dreams and send them to people who needed hope or healing. As Emma read about the Dream Weaver's adventures, the 3 hatchlings began to demonstrate abilities that left the watching scientists speechless. Melodies, the adventurous purple-blue hatchling, started creating small illusions in the air above its claws, tiny images that corresponded to the characters in Emma's story. When she described the Dreamweaver's flying carpet, a miniature version appeared in shimmering light, complete with tasseled edges and intricate patterns. When the story mentioned a crystal palace, Melodis crafted a delicate structure of pure light that sparkled like captured starlight. Sage, the green-gold hatchling, seemed to be developing empathic abilities. As Emma read about the Dreamweaver's gift for understanding what people truly needed, Sage began to glow softly whenever someone in the hangar felt strong emotions. The little dragon would turn toward whoever was experiencing fear, excitement, or wonder, offering soft musical sounds that seemed to harmonize with and soothe whatever feelings were present. Cosmos, the star-scaled hatchling, displayed the most remarkable ability of all. As Emma read about the Dreamweaver's journeys to different worlds, Cosmos began to project actual images into the air, not mere illusions like its sibling, but what appeared to be real views of distant places. The images showed alien landscapes, fantastic cities, and cosmic phenomena that no one in the hangar had ever seen before. Those are real places, Thiroleth whispered in amazement. My youngest is somehow accessing the universal memory, seeing locations that exist across the galaxy. This should be impossible for one so young. Dr. Chen was frantically adjusting her equipment to record these phenomena, but her instruments could barely register what was happening. The energy readings are off the scale, she reported. But it's not destructive energy, it's creative, constructive. It's as if they're learning to manipulate reality at a fundamental level. The political situation outside the hangar continued to deteriorate. Council Representative Valdris, a stern Altarian with bronze skin and silver eyes, demanded immediate access to the dragons in the name of galactic security. Dr. Yamoto from the Universal Institute insisted that the hatchlings needed proper scientific study before their abilities became dangerous. Lord Kexington of the Stellar Nobles claimed ancient hereditary rights to all dragon encounters, based on treaties signed centuries ago. But Theralith remained adamant that her children would not be disturbed. When Marcus Webb tried to explain the political pressures the colony was facing, the great dragon's response was simple and final. Let them rage and posture all they wish. My children have found peace here, and peace they shall have. Any who threaten that peace will discover why dragons were once feared across 1,000 worlds. Emma, still reading steadily, had reached the climax of The Weaver of Dreams. In the story, the Dream Weaver faced her greatest challenge, healing the nightmares of an entire world that had been traumatized by war. The task seemed impossible, but the Weaver discovered that the most powerful dreams were those created not by one person alone, but by many working together. As Emma read this passage, something extraordinary happened. The three hatchlings' individual abilities began to merge and amplify each other. Melodis's illusions became more solid and real. Sage's empathic projections reached every person in the hangar, filling them with the same sense of peace and wonder that the hatchlings themselves felt. Cosmos's visions expanded to show not just distant places, but distant possibilities. Glimpses of futures where dragons and humans worked together to create marvels beyond imagination. The combined effect was overwhelming. Every person in the hangar found themselves caught up in a shared vision of hope and collaboration that transcended species barriers. They saw cities built in the clouds where dragons and humans lived in harmony. They witnessed great libraries where dragon lore and human knowledge merged to unlock the secrets of the universe. They experienced moments of pure joy as dragon children and human children played together among the stars. Outside the hangar, the arguing diplomats and scientists suddenly fell silent as the vision reached them as well. Through the windows, they could see the impossible sight of three tiny dragons creating wonders that defied every law of physics they thought they understood. This changes everything, Dr. Yamo.